All right, so moving forward with some examples here, let's take a look at example 4. And here, okay, I'll click the button. And, oh, okay. So a few things are happening here. One is how are we clicking this and making that number change? And then when we get to 10, how do we raise this alert? So if we open up the HTML for that page, we see that inside of our script tag, we have both a variable declared. So here we're creating a variable called counter, and we have a function called count that increments the count and also grabs an element in the page that has a counter ID in the tag. All right, this pound counter. You see that we have a class called ID that is associated with counter, and we set the inner HTML to the new value of counter, the incremented value. So that's how we got it to go 8, 9, 10, and so on. All right. We also saw in class today that if we wanted to increment it differently, like by 4, we could do plus equals 4. All right, and save that and go back to this guy. You know, we're counting by 4 now. When will the next one happen? It's a big question. All right, so that's just the counter piece of it, but then we had that alert raised. So here's JavaScript's implementation of an if statement. So we say if, and then in parentheses we check to see whether or not that counter is divisible by 10, right? Or in other words, a multiple of 10. If it is, we alert the counter is at, and here is an injection of that variable into this string. These are backticks, $sign and the curly braces. So this is very similar to what we do with the HTML files with Jinja. But this is just testing whether or not the counter is divisible by 10. If it is, raise an alert that inserts the value of the counter. We still have all of this happening here in the HTML, so maybe we can abstract that away, and this is our approach. So now the main difference between this and the last example is that we don't have the on-click and the function here inside of the HTML. Instead, we've taken and moved everything into this section of JavaScript. All of what we have in this piece is the same, right? We create our variable counter, we write a function called count, and increments that, selects the counter, changes the HTML, tests whether or not it's divisible by 10, shows the alert. But the other piece is this add event listener. So in the document, we're adding an event listener that is kind of monitoring the DOM. It's monitoring this page for events. And an event is submitting that button, clicking that button. So that's when it's monitoring the DOM, and it's paying attention to if that button is clicked. And if it is, then we'll do count. Okay, where count is this function. So this is desirable because then what we can do is we can have a separate JavaScript script that would contain all of our functionality and have HTML on its own that doesn't need to kind of intermingle the two. So it makes our code a lot nicer. All right, let's take a look at example 6. Now I click. It's at 10. Great. Same thing. So right, the only difference here is nothing except for that to totally take that HTML or the JavaScript out, we can treat it just like we treated a CSS file. We can throw it in our static files, and you see that I have my CSS, but I also have my JS folder here, where I have a file called example1, and inside of example1 is exactly what we had in the last in example 5. All right, this is my first standalone JavaScript file, and I'm bringing it in just like we have with any static file in Flask. Okay, so now we get the same behavior out of this little bit of code in a separate script. Now I'm going to return to having everything in the everything in the document now from here out, though.